It is hot in Los Angeles. I like hot weather, though. I'm not complaining. I don't. Now, there are black folks who like cold weather, but this is one black man, and I think most black people do not. They're not into the cold weather. Most black people, maybe it's the quote-unquote African nature in us, but maybe it has a lot to do with the nappy hair. But I like hot weather. I'm Jesse Lee Peterson. A white person can't say nappy hair anymore. Isn't that terrible? You can't say nappy hair. White people can't say nappy hair. White folks don't know what to say to us, really. They have been put in such a bind. And but hopefully one day they'll overcome it. Is to stand up, take a stand, and overcome it. You're truly not gonna. It's not gonna get better by hiding and running and giving into the enemies of good. Oh, that's a good one. The enemies of good. And there are many people out there who are the enemies of good. The abortion folks, Planned Parenthood, the National Organization of Women Who Hate Men, the ACLU, the Jesse Jacksons, the Sharpton, the Farrakhan's, the Congressional Black Caucus, they hate good. They are doers of evil. And not of good. 888-77-JESSE, 888-77-JESSE, no I. That's a call-in line if you'd like to call in and have questions or comments. We are going to really deal with issues. My whole purpose in life is to wake up people. Wake up all people, but especially black Americans. Black Americans, not all, are in a crisis. And it is getting worse instead of getting better. And only because there is so much fear in telling truth now. And if you tell the truth, the first thing that happens is that the world go after you to shut you down. Now, you know that got to be evil. Why would anyone, think about it, why would anyone in their right state of mind would go after you to prevent truth? What is behind that? They threaten your sponsors. They try to get you off the air. They call you names. And all you're doing is telling the truth. Even if they don't agree with that truth, why not let you just say it? Why is there a deliberate effort to shut down truth? Is it because truth can change things? Is it because truth would not allow the lie to control you? What is it that causes people to hate truth? I want you to think about that. My guest for you and me this last hour is Karen Umemoto. I hope I'm saying that right. If not, hopefully she'll forgive me. She's a professor and the author of, she's a professor of urban studies and the author of the Truce, Lessons from an LA Gang War. And I'm looking forward to talking with Karen about this. She's a professor at University of Hawaii. Let's go right to Karen. Karen, good morning, and thank you so much for coming on with me.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
When I read your bio, and especially, I'm very interested in the book that you've written, The Truth and Lessons from the LA Gangs. Tell the folks first, Karen, about urban studies. What have you discovered and about that?
Well, the book is about it's a case study of a gang war that took place in Venice in the Venice part of Los Angeles in 1994. And it's an example of the kind of interracial gang conflict that we've seen over the past 10 or 15 years now. And I think the case study was that I did that case study at the time of the highest rate of gang violence in the history of the U.S. and in the history of Los Angeles. So it took place at a historic moment. So I tried to capture what was taking place at that time so we could understand this problem a little better so that we can help address it even better than we do now.
And was this a study of predominantly black gangs?
This study of conflict between 2 Latino gangs and 1 black gang.
What causes young men and now women to turn toward gang violence? Why do they unite together? What causes that and create the type of problems that they create for a society?
Well, I think there are lots of underlying social problems that we face in the U.S. today that gives rise to gang involvement, like poverty, like disenfranchisement, like the lack of services, like zero tolerance in the schools, and other types of punitive policies within within the juvenile and criminal justice system that doesn't really hit at the roots of these problems, but only further marginalizes people. And when people the more people become marginalized, the more susceptible they are to other alternatives, such as gangs. So I think that's kind of the fundamental problem. The rise in gang violence over the past 10 or 15 years really depends from neighborhood to neighborhood, but there was greater conflict between different racial groups, in part because of the economic competition, both in the regular labor market and the underground economy. And I think some of the conflicts that we've seen that have become really intense are the ones that have to do with competition over the drug trade.
Right. When you say poverty, during your study, did you find that most gang members were poor? What do you mean poverty? How does poverty cause gang violence?
Poverty, and let me specify economic poverty, because there's a lot of richness in these communities and richness in the lives of these youth. But the economic poverty that gives people little choice as to what kinds, in terms of how to feed your family. There are a lot of young men that were involved in the gangs and the gangs' economic activities who are bringing home the food for the family. So when you have that kind, or who are the ones buying the Christmas presents and the birthday presents. So when other kids see that that's one way that you can provide for yourself and your family, then it becomes a viable alternative.
But how does that, or why is the question? Why does, I'm not quite understanding. So,
why is there poverty?
Right. Let me ask this: if they don't have money to buy for their kids, why would that cause them to go out and kill other gang members who don't have money either, or kill people and their little children, and kill people in their own community? How is that helping their situation?
Right. That was more of an explanation for gang involvement and not gang violence. Not all gang members are violent, and not all gangs are involved in violent activity, and not all gang members are engaged in violent activity all the time. There are usually specific conflicts that are causing the violence. And in this case, it started in this particular case, and it doesn't. I'm not speaking for all cases, but it started with a interpersonal kind of tiff, just a fight between two people, and the two people happen to have gang associations and families. So you had individuals getting involved, families backing them up, gangs related to the families backing them up, and eventually it couldn't be contained anymore, and it became a conflict between two gangs, and actually three gangs in this case, and the drug, control over the drug market also became an issue. And especially when that economic aspect, when people are fighting for turf, becomes an issue, then people will go to greater extent to protect that. And when that happens, and lives are lost and blood is shed, then reputation becomes even a bigger issue and a bigger, a more important thing to protect.
It's funny, Karen, that they fight for turf that they never own. They don't even own the land that they're fighting for.
Right, and that's a quote that's in the book.
Yeah.
One of the associates said that. Why are we fighting? We don't even own this land.
Yeah. Let me take a quick break, Karen, and we'll come right back to you. 888-77-JESSE, 888-77-53773. We're going to take a quick break and come back in a moment. Welcome back. Jesse Lee Peterson is here. Karen Umemoto is my guest. She's the author of a book, The Truce, Lessons from an LA Gang War. And we're talking about gang and how try to get a better understanding of what's going on with these folks. Karen, in their mind, do they believe that they own the land that they're fighting over, or is it just that they don't want other gang members around in that particular area?
Depends on the area you're talking about. In some, there has been a demographic tipping in a lot. People have talked about it in terms of a tipping in a lot of neighborhoods.
Yes.
Many of these neighborhoods were historically African American, and from the 70s to the 80s, the demographic balance has tipped, so that now Chicanos, Mexicanos, Latinos have become the majority in many of these areas, and so there's been similar in the numerical balance of gang members in those neighborhoods. So I think in some neighborhoods, like in Mar Vista, Latino gangs felt they weren't getting their fair share of the praise relative to their African American neighbors, and who were really declining population. So I think that was one of the debating events in the Mar Vista Gardens at that time. And there's also a certain amount of nationalism among prison gangs.
Yeah.
So, and that's where I think the conflict is really intensified, and I think that's a powder keg that many are unaware of. The level of animosity, the degree of segregation, the high degree of organization among prison gangs divided along racial and ethnic lines.
Explain disenfranchised. You said that some of them feel that way. Explain to me, what do you mean by that?
I think particularly on the part of African Americans who feel that, in the job market, in the housing market in particular, that there's greater discrimination against African Americans, so that it's more difficult to find housing, it's more difficult to find a job. And I think for anyone with any criminal record, it's almost impossible to get a job. So I think there's a few, and because of the dislocation they're feeling, even, and the dissipation of many historic African American communities, there is a feeling that they're under siege, that many of the neighborhoods like Venice, which was historically home to African Americans, particularly in the Oakwood area.
Yes.
That gentrification has been a silent dislocator, where they've been priced out of the housing market as well. So there is a feeling, there's a strong feeling, I think, of disenfranchisement, particularly within the African American community. What
percentage of gang members came from single parent home?
I don't know. I couldn't count that. Let me just add one thing to the last question. I think among many with Latino communities, there's also a growing feeling of anxiety and anger, too, with the growing anti-immigrant movement across the U.S. So I think many groups are feeling disenfranchisement and being othered in various ways. And it's unfortunate the situations where, we're turning on each other instead of trying to come together towards a more social justice agenda or a reform agenda.
Did you notice or did you deal with the fact that many of them are coming from single-parent home, or that wasn't dealt with?
Yeah, I didn't do a survey of that, so I really can't say.
Was it discussed at all?
No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. Really.
Okay. Is that an important factor?
I don't know so much single parent homes because I got to know people who were from coupled homes and single parent homes. So, but I think I think that there's that these families were facing challenges. I'll put it that way. Whether they were single-parent households or not, I think they're facing challenges of that many families today face: economic, social, mental health, and other challenges.
Who is to blame for gang violence and the way that these folks feel? Is there a particular person or are there people who is to blame for their action, the gang violence or the actions of the gang members?
I don't know if I would use the blame, but I think there are lots of contributing factors, a lot of people who are in positions of responsibility who can do something about it. Kids aged, 10 to 15 are going through this very difficult adolescent period and shouldn't have guns. I think one of the big problems is the proliferation of firearms in communities. And I think it's appalling that kids could get firearms so easily. I mean, kids were fighting years ago, but it wasn't fatal because people didn't have fatal weapons. So I think there are lots of people responsible for the proliferation of firearms in communities. And I think part of it has to do with policy. Part of it has to do with manufacturing of guns. And part of it has to do with the regulation and distribution of guns. So, and of course, how we parent our kids to be violent or nonviolent is an important factor.
When you say part of it is to do with policy, explain to me what you mean by that.
We have very loose firearms policies, and there's been a strong resistance historically for any type of gun control. And I think the Virginia Tech shooting raises that issue of how easy it is for someone, even with a mental health problem, to get firearms. And I think that's a public policy problem. That's a public policy issue. We need to change and re-examine the policies that regulate the control of firearms.
If that's the case, and I'm not arguing at this point whether it is or not, firearms are available to, if they're easy to get, the average person can get them. If that's the case, why don't we see there are more people who are not committing crimes with firearms than there are those who are? Why don't we see majority of people committing crimes with firearms if firearms are the problem or the policies are the problem?
Well, I think it's a matter of who's getting the firearms and how to control who gets them. And I think that's very, very hard to control, especially when we have a loose gun control policy. So I think I definitely think it needs to be tightened up a bit. When you asked who else is responsible, I think that one of the related problems is the zero tolerance policies in the schools. You know, when if you commit the act of physical aggression, many times you're kicked out. Or if you're found with narcotics, illegal narcotics on campus,
yes,
are kicked out of that school, and you're not allowed, in many cases, to go to another school. Like if you're in the LAUSD, many times you're sent to the county system, and the county schools have had problems with retention and quality. So when you have a zero tolerance policy where when principals don't have the power to adjust the punishment according to the level of culpability and the degree and seriousness of these acts and repetition, including the repetition of acts, then you have very little leverage to influence the behavior of the kids, because all you're doing is kicking them out, and you're kicking them out to the streets. And mothers have told me time and time again, once they're in the streets are like a mother, and it's hard for even me as a mother to get my son back or my daughter back.
Right. So what should the schools do when they find these kids with drugs and weapons and things on there? How should they deal with that?
I think there are lots of things that could be done that we're not doing. I think there are lots of programs in communities that schools can partner with, because usually these necessitate a real holistic approach, not only to the child, but to the whole family. And so the kinds of, sometimes you need mental health counseling. Sometimes you need substance abuse treatment. Sometimes you need some good mentors. Sometimes you need family intervention because there are conflicts in the families that are taking place. Sometimes there's physical abuse. Sometimes there's just difficulty that the youth are having in school academically. So I think you have to really find out what the situation is of each of these youth, each student who is getting into trouble, and finding out what the causes of these problems are, these behavioral issues are, and then try to mobilize resources to help that child and take a much more rehabilitative approach than a punitive approach. And if studies show that most kids age out of violence and violent behavior by the age of 17. So let's focus on this age between 10 and 16 where we're finding most kids getting into trouble, and help them work their way past that stage of adolescence.
If the schools were to focus on that, put that much attention to dealing with the social aspect of the child, when will they have time for academics?
Well, if we could fund the schools at the level they need to be funded, we could deal with both. And schools should be about the whole person. The whole No Child Left Behind has given very, very little room to deal with the whole person. And what we're doing is it's creating a culture of failure. You're setting standards. Students who aren't meeting the standards then feel like a failure, and that adds to low self-esteem, that adds to the stresses and pressures. And when we're not funding policies like No Child Left Behind to really help bring schools up to par, then we're really doing the service. And I think that schools, there are philosophical approaches towards schools that really take a whole person approach to development, including raising good citizens.
Carol, let me take a quick bottom of the hour break. 888-77-JESSE. Back in a moment. Okay, folks, welcome back to the show. Winding down the last hour. We have a few more minutes with Karen Umemoto. I'm sorry, Karen. Karen, do me a favor. Let me hear you say your last name.
Umemoto.
Umemoto. All right. Thank you, Karen. Karen, and she is the author of the Truce, Lessons from an LA Game War. And Karen, this has been a very, very interesting dialogue with you. I want to ask, I have noticed that, and I've been working with gang members for the last 17 years or so. I've noticed that most of them, the ones I've worked with, come from single-parent home. The fathers are not around, and that they're very angry. And I noticed that most of them carry out these acts because they lack character and not necessarily material things. How important is character, and did you find that most of these boys and girls lack character?
You know, character is a hard word because everybody has character. I think there's a lot of peer pressure to engage in certain kinds of acts. And if you're using character to mean kind of lack of one's own independent sense of values, morals, and that makes them susceptible to peer pressure to get them to commit immoral acts or to do harmful acts towards others.
I find that they are immoral. You know, they have no respect for themselves or others. They make babies out of wedlock. They kill one another. They have no feelings about that. They blame others for their act. And they have a lot of anger, and most of the anger is passed down to them from their mothers and grandmothers. And it just set them up to fail.
I think there's a lack of love. I think a lot of people suffer from a lack of love.
Yes.
And it's a lack of love not only for others, but for themselves.
Right.
And I think that we need to get back to some of those root issues. And a lot of the mothers who are having these kids have lack of love too. And that gets passed down. And that becomes part of one's existence. And so there is an emptiness. There is a self-deprecating,
right,
attitude.
I grew up on a plantation, Karen, down in Alabama, and at a time when laws were against Black Americans, we couldn't go into certain places. I remember for colors only, whites only signs. I lived in a house that was made of cheap wood, and you could stand outside and look directly into the house. But yet I never heard of gang violence. I grew up not knowing anyone who had had an abortion. There was no such thing as rap crap music exploiting women. They didn't blame racism. There was more of a sense of respect and hard work and doing the right thing. Mm-hmm. And we were poor, but we didn't go out and commit crime. What's the difference between then and now?
I think a big difference between then and now is that when you were poor, my dad was a gardener. We grew up pretty poor. I didn't know my dad had to make choices between buying milk and buying a pack of cigarettes.
That's right.
And until he shared it with us later in life. He didn't want to burden us with that. But we didn't know we were poor.
Yeah.
And we didn't have television and media in your face saying you are poor because look at all these rich people.
That's right.
And so I think there's a difference in, I think, society, if you look at the income distribution in our society today, back in the day when we were young, it was a bell curve. There were a few rich people, a few really poor people, and most people were in the middle, or somewhere between the middle and the lower,
Right.
Lower middle. Now we have a camel. We have this bump of people who are very, very wealthy, and we have a bump on the lower middle income end, and we're losing the middle class. And if, I don't know, I forgot what the percentage was, but, 10% controlling 80% of the wealth and flaunting it in the media and helping to create this culture where material value is equated with value of one's person. I think it just creates this dissonance where people feel they need certain things to be happy or to be somebody, and that quest to be somebody when we can't be ourselves, I think, festers this inner anger and inner anxiety and inner conflict that I think is plaguing many aspects of our society, not just the gang subculture.
If you grew up if a person grew up in a home and they had a father and mother together, good parents, and the parents, by example, taught them the real values of life, and that is to develop strong character. And you went out into the world and you saw these rich folks or people flaunting their money. Would that bother you if you had a sense of worth within yourself?
If you have strong character, and I don't want to say. I want to say that a lot of single parents can do that too. I don't necessarily feel. I mean, my sister's a single mom. She does a great job with her daughter, and I think that we know a lot of single parents who are doing great jobs with their children.
most single parents are not doing it, because when we look at the stats of the prisons and jails around the country, violence in the communities, out-of-wedlock birth, abortion, these folks are coming from single parents' homes. So most single parents are failing.
I would say that a lot of those who are failing may come from single parent homes, but I wouldn't go as far to say that most single family homes have kids that are failing. I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, all the stats show that it is true. And if that's the case, why? I mean,
there are those different things, though. The fact that many youth who are failing come from single-family homes, that may be true, but that's different from saying that most single-family households have failing kids. That, I don't think stats have proven that to be true. But the first part of what you said, I think could well be true.
But
and
I know, but
I'm not condoning out-of-wedlock marriages. I think people should. I think people are in a much better position to have children in marriage, and so don't get me wrong on that.
Right.
But I just don't want to chastise many of the single parents who are doing a great job with their kids under very difficult circumstances.
Well, I agree with you that there are some single parents who are doing a pretty decent job, but most, I have to tell you, are definitely failing, and that's why these kids are suffering, because they're not coming from a home where the father's there with them.
I do think we need more fathers to step up to the plate.
Yeah.
So I don't disagree with you on that, but I think in the overall issue of why this is happening, if I knew, I don't think there's a silver bullet that would solve the problem, but I think there are lots of little solutions and some big ones that could make a difference. But I think we have to look at the issue of firearms. I think we have to look at the issue of schools. I live in Hawaii now, and I see kids playing in the parks till 10 at night.
Yeah.
The schools are open. There are festivals everywhere. There are so many gatherings in celebration as opposed to gatherings for funerals. I mean, we have that too. People get old and pass away, but not the kinds of funerals where we're commemorating people's lives who were gunned down too soon. But I think there's an amount of civic life that we need to rejuvenate in these communities, but it's not going to happen unless all of the different stakeholders are able to work together a lot better. So for law enforcement to work well with communities, for community organizations to work well with law enforcement, for people, and one of the fundamental messages of this book is that we live in a society today that is multicultural and polarized along class, religious, and many linguistic and many other lines of difference. And we live different realities even when we occupy the same space. We don't see the world in the same way.
Yeah.
Any solution has to take into account everybody's point of view. We need to understand how everybody sees the world so that we could come together in collaboration to move forward on effective solutions.
Karen, I want to make one other point about the parents' situation, and I want to ask you about the effects of illegal aliens on these communities and gangs. I've noticed that within the black population, when there are two parents in the homes, the gang violence tend to fade away. But as opposed to a single parent in the homes, my question is, some actors, female actors are now, or entertainers or rich females are having babies without husbands. And I personally think that is a wrong and deceptive and wicked message to send out, that it's okay for a woman to have a child without a husband just because she has money. Am I wrong in that?
You know, I make it a point philosophically to not judge people based on their decisions like that. I mean, I wouldn't make that decision because I know that I couldn't. Well, one, I'm not rich. Two, I couldn't handle it.
Yeah.
I just couldn't manage everything I need to manage in my life without some help. So I feel blessed in my current situation, but I would never make a value judgment about other people's choices. So sorry, I can't comment on that one.
Yeah. I want to ask about illegal aliens coming into the country, and they're bringing in gangs and just causing a lot of problems in the communities. But let me take a quick break. We'll come back with that question. Then we'll tell the folks how to get in contact with you and get a copy of your book, The Truce, Lessons from an LA Gang War. 888-775-3773, 888-77-JESSE. We got to take a quick break with Karen, come back and wind down this session. Back in a moment. Karen Umemoto is my guest. She's a professor of urban studies and the author of The Truce, Lessons from an LA Gang War, and she's out of Hawaii, University of Hawaii. Karen, let's deal with the illegal alien situation, and then I want to tell folks how to get your information before we end this conversation with you. Illegals are coming in, I mean, just by the numbers now, and they are bringing in gangs who, especially within the black community, they hate black folks. You know, they have a bad impression of black people. In Mexico, black Americans are second-class citizens there, and so they're coming in and attacking black Americans, attacking other gangs and non-gang members within the communities. What do you expect to see in that if not dealt with quickly?
You know, thanks to Lou Dobbs and others, we're in a feeling this anti-immigrant sentiment again. And I think that we would argue that we're not importing gangs, we're exporting gangs, that many of these gangs, most of these gangs are homegrown gangs. The gang phenomenon in the U.S. Is unlike no other in terms of just regular street gangs. And we're getting complaints from other countries saying, why are you creating this gang culture and exporting it to these to the countries from where people may have immigrated. So I think there are the whole issue and controversy over undocumented workers and immigration is a really complicated one, and I'm not sure that immigration per se is contributing to gang violence.
Well, in South Central L.A., and I've witnessed it. I know many police officers who are dealing with it. I do a lot of work in the jails, and the jails are just running over with illegal gang members.
I'm not saying that that there aren't gangs that are comprised predominantly of those who are not documented, but what I'm saying is that where does we assume that the problem starts in their home country, as opposed to understanding how, when immigrants come here, many do get involved in gangs and then go back, get extradited, and go back home or sent back home by their families and continue that kind of activity back home, and then create the trade routes that we see today.
What should we do with those folks?
I think we should deal with them just as we would deal with any other person who has been engaged in illegal activity.
But should we deport the illegals, the ones that are here illegally? Should we deport them back to wherever it is they came from?
I think that happens now.
And should that be happening? Is that the right thing to do?
I'm not sure if that's always the right thing to do. I mean, there are some people who were born and raised here, or who came. I'm thinking of, there are some Asian refugees who came, and I think this was publicized in the media, and I think it involved Cambodian youth who the U.S. has different types of relationships with different countries, and in some cases the U.S. deports people, in other cases they hold them in federal prisons while they're working out agreements about this with the home country. There have been some people who have been deported and have run into serious problems back home because they don't speak that home language. They're not part of that society, and they never were. So, and sometimes there are political differences where people come into danger when they're deported. So I think we should look at those cases more carefully and make a judgment on a case-by-case basis. I'm not an immigration expert. I'm not an immigration lawyer. But I don't know how much time we have left, but let me say one thing.
Okay.
I was born and raised in Los Angeles. I was born on the west side. We moved down to Gardena when they started building housing down there. I went from Gardena High School, Perry Junior High, and Gardena High.
Oh, okay.
Graduated from Gardena High. And when I graduated and this is in the 1970s, so I'm dating myself here. But when I graduated from Gardena High in the 1970s, Gardena, the city of Gardena, was named the most diverse city in the United States at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It was quarter black, quarter Latino, quarter white, and quarter Asian. If you look at my yearbook and you see the class, the senior class government, you see Cynthia Lipkins, African-American president of our class, Julie Ito, I think vice president or secretary. I mean, we had the rainbow. We had the rainbow on the track, rainbow on the cheerleader squad. And even though there were ethnic or racial cliques, this was a time when, in the mid-'70s, when we were at the height of economic expansion, people had jobs, people had healthy families as a whole, and people got along. And people had respect for one another, and people worked together. I feel so blessed that I experienced that time. And for anyone alive who has those memories, you always maintain the hope that we could create a society where we can all be civil and we could celebrate in each other across the differences and appreciate them and use difference as a resource for richer, democratic, deep participation in civic life.
Because of time, Karen, I'm sorry to cut you off, but I need to move it because we're really running out of time. My final question is about illegal alien gangs. Will we ever be able to solve this problem of illegal aliens gangs coming in? Will we be able to solve the problem of gang violence without shutting the borders down and deporting illegal gang members?
Yeah, I think we can. I mean, I think we have to separate those issues. I think that we shouldn't play the blame game. Shutting down the borders isn't going to solve the gang problem.
But it will allow them to keep coming in if the door is wide open.
We are growing gangs here.
And that's why we don't need any more to come in.
A lot of people who become gang members after they come here. So closing the borders won't solve the gang problem. We need to solve the gang problem here at home so that when people go back to their countries, they're not spreading it any further than it's already spread.
Karen, tell the folks how to get a copy of your book and your website if you have a website to give out.
You could get the copies of the book from either Cornell University Press or Amazon.com or any bookseller. It's called The Truce, Truce. Some people think it's T-R-U-T.
Right.
Truth, yeah. As in gang truce. And, it's dedicated to all those who lost their lives and loved ones, and it's written in hopes that we could find effective solutions to this problem and humane solutions to this problem. And I really thank you for this opportunity to talk about the book and all these issues that I think are really, really important, and I'm glad you're facilitating this kind of conversation. We need a lot more conversation. We don't always agree.
That's right.
But I think we need to just look at things from all different sides, and I'm open to looking at new ways of thinking about it too. And you raised the issue of immigration, and I seriously haven't really looked at that in depth.
Yes.
And you're causing me to think more about that. And I think we need thoughtful discussion, thoughtful civil discussion. And I'd like to get away from the blame game and get more to the solutions game, and let's try to find solutions to these problems together.
We definitely need solutions. And Karen, I've enjoyed speaking with you today. I wish you well with your book, and I hope you'll come back again.
Thank you very much.
All right.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Karen. Have a good one now.
Okay, God bless. Take care.
And God bless you. The book is called The Truce, Truce, Lessons from an LA Gang War by Karen Umemoto. I'm going to get it right after a while. Forgive me, I'm black, and I'm allowed to be wrong. Isn't that right? If you're black, you can be wrong, and it's okay. I went through the affirmative action program. No, I didn't. No affirmative action here. But thank you, folks, for tuning in. We're here Monday through Friday, 10 to 12 noon. Tell folks about the show. I have to say, though, if you don't develop character, you're not going to make it in life. You'll make it. Some folks will make it financially. You live in a nice home, but you're going to be miserable. You're not going to be able to find a good wife or a good husband. Your kids are going to be just rebellious and out of control, because when you don't have a strong moral, when you don't have a strong moral foundation within yourself, you're empty, an empty shell. You're just lost. Physically, you may be doing well for a season, but within, you're lost. Character, there's no amount of money that that you could put on that. It's everything. It's life. It's you. It's everything. And we've lost that, and we're losing that in this country fast, folks, because people are afraid to deal with it. It's about the character. It has nothing to do with what you don't have or do have materially. I grew up, didn't know it at the time, and you've heard that a lot from different folks, poor. But I didn't know it because I felt good within myself. So I didn't know I was poor. It's not about what you have or don't have, or who you're with or you're not with. The rich folks having money and the poor don't. It's not about that. It's about the character. If that was the case, black folks would have been out of order a long time ago. Prior to the civil rights movement, I'm telling you, gang violence, I didn't hear about it. Out-of-wedlock birth, I actually grew up not knowing anyone who had an abortion. If they did, I didn't know about it. Out-of-wedlock birth. If you got pregnant, it was an embarrassment. You have to get married. Or if you had that baby, you have to take care of it. You can't go on the welfare, or couldn't go on the welfare. Thank you for tuning in. Have a good and safe weekend. We'll be back Monday morning at 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Go to my website at bondinfo.org, bondinfo.org, or call us at 800-411-2663 to order supplies, make donations, get a copy of our newsletter. Have a safe and sound weekend. Take care.